Take your shoes from off your feet, for the ground where you are standing is holy ground. This was the verse that was going through my mother's mind when she first set foot on Congo soil. She knew that it would be strange to you and to me that that was the verse that was going through her mind, because the ground didn't necessarily look like holy ground. It was actually in bad shape at points and unsanitary at times. But the little African children were running around barefooted with their homemade toys, and they were happy and having a good time in holy ground. So I made one of their homemade toy so you could see what toys they made. I made the simplest one because I couldn't make the other toys that they make. I made a soccer ball. This is fun. Their soccer balls were made out of anything they could get their hands on. Now these are just plastic bags that I got and put together with yarn. They usually had string, put their balls together. And I wish I had remembered to get a picture, but I didn't look for a picture of their actual made-up soccer ball. So I think I'll use this out in my yard and let my grandchildren kick it around. I think they would have fun. We'll see how long it lasts, our soccer ball. When 6 of us went out to the Congo in 2006, missionary children, for 3 weeks, we took soccer balls and we gave them to the children, and they were ecstatic to have the real thing. So the ground was very sandy in dry season, and there's a picture during dry season. Leah's helping me with this. All right. Yes, during dry season. This was years later. We got stuck in the sand. You can see how much sand is piled up on the side and how much sand is in the road. My father would rev up his engine and go through that sand as fast as he could, but oftentimes he got stuck and passengers had to get out and push the car through the sand. That's why I'm so strong to this day. Just picture it. I could barely walk, and I was pushing cars out of the sand. So I wanted to give a little illustration of that would make it clear. Think about Maggie McAndrew. She's 3 years old. If she had been out there with us in the Congo, I could just picture it. No seat belts or car seats. She would be sitting near the door. Of course, she'd have to be there. That would be her place. And when we would get stalled, she would be the first one out the door, running and trying to wade through that sand, which would probably come up way up here on her, I would think. But she would make it around to the back and claim her piece of the pie, her part of the car that she wanted to push, and nobody could push her away. Don't you agree? Nobody would be able to push her away. But she would be pushing before any of us could get back there because we weren't excited about pushing. But Maggie would be excited. I can just see her pushing her great-grandfather through the sand. We could just sit back and watch Maggie push. That's how we get our muscles, pushing those cars. Now, in this picture of the other picture, you see my father and mother and my younger 2 brothers. You can't see Ferris too well, Mark and Ferris. And then this is our African helper. When we were in Congo, we had lots of African helpers. They made life a lot easier for us. If we hadn't had those African helpers, I don't think we would have made it so well. We had to make everything from scratch. Ironing with coals in the iron and washing everything and hanging it. I mean, everything was from scratch. So we had to have helpers. And these helpers stood with us. They were wonderful. When we would go to the States for a year and come back, the African helpers would be right there ready to follow us everywhere. We had 2 named Bofe and Mabinchi. and their families. And when we got back from the States, they would be ready to go. We moved a lot. My father was a builder, so we moved from station to station, and they went with us and stayed in the villages and were like family to us. Now, during rainy season, the ground was wet and rutted. This is a picture of a car during rainy season. This was sent to me recently, actually. Now, Maggie and I would not be so quick to run out in that mud to help with that car. Of course, we could have done it easily, but we didn't want to get all muddy, so that would have to be left with somebody else. Maggie and I do draw the line. We really do. And I think, is there another one? Oh, yeah, this one. Oh, boy. Recently sent to me, and somebody's going to have to walk in that mud, but it's not going to be Maggie. She'll stick with the sand. Now, I know that after seeing these pictures, you're going to want to rush over to Holly Elrod and ask her, where is she? Holly, to book a cruise to the Congo for you, maybe for spring break. Now, I know she's never booked a cruise to the Congo before, but this will be the first, as several of you line up. It took us by freighter 2 to 6 weeks to get to the Congo, but I know that nowadays Holly would be able to find a cruise that was a lot quicker than that, and you could get to the Congo. But just remember, after you arrive on Congo soil, to take your shoes from off your feet, for the ground where you will be standing is truly holy ground. My mother was so excited because the Lord had called them to serve and share the gospel with these particular people. How did it all begin? By the providence of God, how did my parents end up serving in the Congo, which was so many miles away back in the day when communication and travel were so slow? No computers, no cell phones, no phones, just snail mail. We lived on one station called Boulape, and the only way to get the mail out was to pay a Congolese bicycler to get on his bicycle twice a week and carry our mail to the nearest town, which was called Mweka. And by car, it would take you over an hour to get there. And he's riding his bicycle twice a week to deliver the mail and bring the mail back to us, because the mail could go out in Mweka. My father grew up in Houston, Texas. My grandfather, his father, built over 50 houses in Houston. And we have pictures of those houses that he built all along the streets. 50 or 60 houses, T.J. Goodrum, in the 1920s. They look like nice houses, don't they? Now, those houses were sold if he was able to sell them, or he rented them out for many years if he was unable to sell them. But when the Depression hit in 1929, my grandfather lost everything. His renters could no longer afford to pay rent, and that was my grandparents' livelihood. They had to move to a town called Dayton, Texas, 37 miles from Houston, where they were able to rent a one-bedroom house. There were 7 of them, 5 in my father's house, family, and 2 grandparents, 7 in the one bedroom. The rent on the 8 acres and cottage was $100 a year, not quite $8.40 a month. But my father said that they were 7 years overdue on the rent before my grandfather was able to pay it off by building a completely new home over and around the old home so that the owner himself could move back in. At that point, Daddy's family moved back to Houston, My father was in college then. The family lived in the one-bedroom house without electricity for 8 years. And we complain. When my father was a freshman in high school, he would come home from school every day and take his shotgun and kill squirrels and rabbits for their evening meal. They absolutely didn't have money for anything. They also ate vegetables from their own garden. My father's mother read the Bible to the family every night by the light of a Coleman gasoline lamp, which had been given to them by relatives because they couldn't have afforded it. They had no electricity in Dayton because they lived just beyond the end of the electric power line. That was great preparation for the Belgian Congo, don't you think? No electricity. And speaking of the Bible, my grandparents loved the Lord and shared their love for God with their 3 children, my father and his brother and sister. Several years ago, my brother Phyllis, who used to be a missionary in Brazil, is now in Stone Mountain. He was with my father before my father died. And my father was getting ready to throw away the Bible. He said, "This is the Bible that my mother read to me over the years." And he was going to throw it away. It was falling apart. And my brother retrieved it, of course, and has had it ever since. My father died in 2009, and my brother has held on to it. But last week he came here from Stone Mountain to give me the Bible to show you all, the Bible that is falling apart. Special Bible. I think this is the front. As you can see, they tried to repair it. The front and the back are different. They did their best to repair it, but it is falling apart. And at the front, it says, "Dedicated to the young people of America," in the hope that it may interest them in the reading of the best of all books. It's stories of the Bible. For young and old, a continuous narrative of the Scriptures told in 168 stories. So I am thankful for this Bible that was read to my father by the light of a Coleman gasoline lamp back in the day during the Depression. When my father graduated from high school, he knew that he could not go to college. It was out of the question, as his parents had no money and he had no money. Still the Depression. But God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. One weekend after Daddy had graduated from high school, the family decided to go to spend the weekend with relatives who lived 9 miles away. Back then, that was a good distance. They saved enough money to put gas in the car for the big trip. My father said, "What happened that weekend can only be seen as the working of the Lord." My cousin and I decided to do something that was certainly not logical. By the providence of God, he and his cousin decided to walk all the way back to Dayton and see if they could sneak into the movie theater and see part of the show at the halftime break when they opened the side doors. That was a 9-mile walk, and no one stopped to give them a ride that day. Hitchhiking used to be safe. My father did a lot of it when he was in the military. They did make it to town before the halftime break. But by the providence of God, after all that walking, the doors to the movie theater did not open as they usually did for young people to sneak in. All their plans appeared to be in vain that day, or were they actually in vain? After checking the theater, my father and his cousin decided to roam around town a bit before heading back the 9 miles. But by the providence of God, the very first person that Daddy ran into in town was a former classmate who said that a man claiming to be my father's uncle had come to town that day to see him. Uncle George told the classmate that if he ran into my father, he should tell him that he would be coming back the next afternoon to take Daddy to college. Uncle George had been the head of the chemistry department and then became the business manager at Austin College in Sherman, Texas, a Presbyterian school. If my father had not walked back the 9 miles with his friend, he would have missed this important message because they weren't planning to come back till late evening on Sunday. And there was no way to communicate, no phones, no way to communicate back then. Daddy and his cousin immediately headed back the 9 miles to tell his parents about this new development. The family returned early the next morning so that Daddy could pack for summer school at Austin College. Uncle George arrived around 3 in the afternoon, as he had said. As they were leaving, it dawned on my grandfather that my father did not have any money to his name because nobody did. So my grandfather reached into his pocket and pulled out all the money he had, 86 cents. What would you do with 86 cents? Wow. And handed it to his son Garland. It was all the money my grandfather had to his name. With that money, Daddy bought a tube of toothpaste. A needy thing, right? At home, they used baking soda and salt. He also bought enough 3-cent stamps to write home every weekend. 3-cent stamps, now they're 73-cent stamps. Daddy wrote in his memoirs about the next day when they arrived at Austin College. I will never forget that day. Monday, June 17th, 1935. He said, my life changed drastically after that event, going to Austin College. Uncle George was very instrumental in my father's life. By God's providence, Uncle George became a wonderful Christian mentor for my father. Praise the Lord for such men. You might want to think about people who have impacted you in your life in a special way and write to them to let them know how influential they have been in your lives, and do it while you still can. Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in the power of your hand to do so. A few years ago, I wrote to 2 of my aunts. One is a Congo aunt. We called everybody in Congo aunt and uncle. And one was my father's sister, Aunt Vera. They were both pleased to receive my letters of encouragement, and they weren't email. I sent snail mail so they could have them in their hands. My brother Byron said that my father's sister, Aunt Vera, read that letter to her sister-in-law and others because it meant so much to her. She was 98 years old when she died the day after Thanksgiving, 2024. I am thankful that I wrote to her several years ago at a time when she could still share. My grandfather told Uncle George as they were leaving that my father was a good mechanic and a good driver. Uncle George gave my father the job of maintenance man for the college for all 4 years that my father was there. He also drove the bus full of students who were going to play ball in various towns, and choir members who were traveling to sing in various churches. Uncle George's wife, Aunt Doris, got Daddy to teach in Vacation Bible School, which he had just done in Dayton in the Baptist church. My father was raised Baptist. One day after my father had been working for several months, he went to Uncle George and asked Uncle George when he might be receiving just a little money for the work he was doing at the college. Uncle George said that he would not be getting any money. All his work went towards his college expenses. Well, Daddy showed Uncle George the soles of his shoes, which had holes in them. And Uncle George said, "I can take care of that, don't worry." And he went inside and came out unscrewing the cleats from a pair of shoes that Uncle George had. He gave them to my father and told him to wear those shoes, and that's exactly what he did all through college and beyond for every occasion. Cleated shoes. My mother, on the other hand, graduated from high school in the small town of Itasca, Texas, and worked as a church secretary for 2 years in order to go to Austin College. She also worked as a church secretary during her years in college in Sherman, Texas. Before my parents met one another at Austin College, they had become friends with 7 students who were missionaries' children from the Belgian Congo, of course. So I'm sure you know where this is going. My parents had not given Africa a glance before they met these 7 children and got to be close friends with them. By the providence of God, their friendships with these students led them to decide that missionary work in the Congo was where they were headed. My mother had not met my father yet. She had decided she would go out as a single missionary to teach at the boarding school that my 4 brothers and I would later attend. My father decided he would go out as an industrial missionary, a builder. Once they met, it was amazing that they both wanted to go to the Belgian Congo. Unusual. They started dating and decided that they would get married and go to the Congo in the not-too-distant future. But one day at chapel at Austin College, they had a speaker who was from the Presbyterian Mission Board. His name was Darby Fulton. He was encouraging students at Austin College to consider missionary work in the Congo, Brazil, Mexico, or Korea. My parents were the only ones to rush up after chapel to tell the speaker that they wanted to go to the Congo soon. However, Darby Fulton said that their plan would not be possible because the mission board was no longer hiring industrial missionaries for Congo. They had decided to hire Europeans to come down to the Congo to build the houses and churches and schools. That was a real disappointment, as it was a closed door to something that they felt so sure about. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. By the providence of God, God still had some preparation work to do that was necessary before the doors to the Congo would be opened for them. One day, my father began to hear a small plane fly over Austin College, and he had heard that free flying lessons were being offered at Austin College in preparation for possibly entering World War II. So he went to Uncle George and said he had heard about these lessons and was interested in free flying lessons. Uncle George said there were only 10 spots and 9 had already been taken. So by the providence of God, Daddy got the 10th spot. Truly, those lessons with takeoffs and landings on dirt airstrips in Sherman, Texas, were very valuable when Daddy served in the Congo in later years, where dirt airstrips were all we had. He flew small planes in the Congo and even checked out the progress of the enemy rebels during troubled times. His plane was actually shot at on several occasions. And a good missionary friend of ours, a Methodist pilot named Burley Law, was killed by the rebels. But those are stories for another time. Not too long after college, Daddy was drafted. He wanted to fly a plane during the war, but instead, he was assigned to work on planes during the almost 5 years of work before the war ended. By the providence of God, those years of servicing planes were very valuable, as Daddy would later go to the Congo and put small planes together, a plane and a box, and fly it back to our mission station. So here are the planes, the plane in the box as it arrived, shipped from New Orleans to Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, and the reassembled Piper Tri-Pacer, the one plane. The inspector, there was a Belgian inspector who watched Daddy put that plane together. It was his job to be there all the time and watch and make sure everything was going well. But when it came to the test flight, that inspector was not keen on flying in the plane with Daddy for the test flight, but it was his job. Daddy said the man reluctantly got on the plane, and it was a safe flight, and they got back. And the interesting thing was, years later, when Dr. Mark Poole, who owned this plane, decided to sell it, he sold it to this very same inspector who was afraid to get on the plane. Now it became his plane. A few years after the war ended, my aunt and uncle in Houston decided they would go to the Congo as missionary teachers at the boarding school, which I would later attend. My parents went to visit my aunt and uncle, and all their paperwork was laid out on the table. With interest, my parents began to read their material, and lo and behold, guess what? The mission board was now hiring industrial missionaries. The idea of hiring builders from Europe did not work out at all. Those European builders did not want to go to spend a few months to a year in primitive Congo. That was out of the question. So 9 years after the disappointing chapel service, when the door to the Congo had closed, the opportunity to go now opened up wide. Revelation 3:8 says, "See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name." Revelation 3:8. Interestingly enough, my aunt and uncle never did go to the Belgian Congo. That had to be the providence of God that they even applied in the first place. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. My parents applied to the Presbyterian Mission Board right away. But believe it or not, the people on the board tried to talk my parents into going to Korea. And my parents said that Korea was not even on their list of 3 preferences. It was Brazil and Mexico and Congo first. But the board said that the only reason my parents wanted to go to the Belgian Congo was because of the 7 friends who had grown up in Congo. That was the only reason they wanted to go there. And my parents said yes, by the providence of God. If it weren't for those 7 friends, they wouldn't be there that day asking to go to the Congo. Finally, they were accepted as missionaries to the Belgian Congo. You know you are on the right path when the waters part before you. Separations were extremely hard to handle in connection with serving in the Congo. My grandfather wanted all 3 of his children to grow up in Houston and live right near him for the rest of his life. That did not happen when my father headed off to Africa. Being the oldest, this was the son who mowed the lawns, that belonged to my grandfather's rental houses when my father was only 12 years old. Push lawnmowers, no riding lawnmowers. This was the son who killed squirrels so that the family would have food to eat in Dayton during the Depression. This was the father who reached in his pocket and gave his son every penny he had, 86 cents, so that his son would have a little money for necessities when he arrived at Austin College. This was the father who allowed his son to walk 9 miles back to Dayton to sneak into the movie theater. But now this was the son headed off to darkest Africa. I didn't think I would get emotional. In 1949. Africa was so far away and foreign to my relatives at that time. They thought of Africa as the white man's graveyard. My aunt, Vera, the one I wrote to, she said that my grandfather turned around when we were driving away, sorry, and said, "I will never see Garland again." He didn't think we would ever come back. That had to be an extremely difficult day for my relatives. But I know that my grandfather's faith got him through the next 4 years when we were in Congo. I am sure that the letters my mother wrote on a weekly basis helped him to see that God was with us, that my father and mother were serving the Lord in a needy country, and that the Lord was truly blessing the ministry in the Congo, as many Congolese were coming to believe in the gospel. But I am also sure that it was a great joy when we returned back to Houston 4 years later with my younger brother Mark in tow. Take your shoes from off your feet, for the ground where you are standing is holy ground. When my parents finally arrived in Congo, they were excited. They served 21 years, never doubting their call to serve there. God knows why the door to the Congo had to be closed in the beginning, so that my parents would have preparation time. God knows the beginning from the end that we don't have any idea about. I've asked Callie Vandelin to sing and Hannah to accompany her, and then I have only one more story to tell you about concerning our arrival in the Belgian Congo. I want to give you a little taste of Congo and what it was like back in the 1950s and on, so that when you arrive in the Congo, you'll know what to expect from your cruise. So, yeah, Callie.
This song, well, there we go. It may be unfamiliar to some of you, but we would ask you to sing along. It's a pretty simple tune, and there are 6 verses, so please feel free to join in and sing with us as you learn it, or if you already know it, please join in. God moves in a mysterious way.
much. Okay. I have just enough time to tell you about going from darkness to light on our first station of Luebo. I celebrated my first birthday in Houston, my second birthday in Belgium, and my third birthday in the Congo. And we have a picture of my third birthday. If you can find me, I am the little girl right there with the white dress. So excited to be having a third birthday party. And this basket right here is one of my best presents. It came from the Africans. It's a chicken. They often gave us chickens. That was my first pet chicken. And I don't know what happened to it. I don't have the memory of whether they ate the chicken eventually or not. But for a while, it was my pet. And these were the other missionary children. Oh, my brother, Byron and David, and me, and then a couple other families that were there on the station. We arrived at Luebo as a family of 5 with my 2 older brothers and me. And here's a picture of my mother with Byron and David and me. And you can see the palm trees that were very important, the palms they used to bake. And this is at Luebo. My 2 younger brothers would later be born at Bulape in the Congo. Mark Poole was the missionary doctor who delivered my 2 younger brothers. That is where the name Mark came from. The missionary doctor who delivered my brothers. And so this is Uncle Mark Poole, who delivered Mark and Ferris, and this is baby Mark after in Congo, just after he was born, and near one of our houses. Yeah, Mark Poole was a wonderful doctor. When we arrived at Luebo, the station had no electricity or running water. Just imagine that. It was dark at Luebo. My father's job was to install a light and water system for Luebo Station. The hospital was hit the hardest. The Congolese women were now having their babies by the light of a kerosene lantern. How would you feel about that, Rachel and Kaylee and Mallory and April and Haley? How would you all feel about that in a hospital? And the mattresses weren't what you would call holy mattresses. The patients in the wards received light from a piece of string just burning in a pot of palm oil. Early morning prayer services were usually conducted with an old lantern on the pulpit. And the songs were sung from memory or not at all. Gasoline lanterns supplied the light for the library, which was open 2 nights a week for the Congolese students. Since the lighting was inadequate, the attendance was poor. Remember that my father spent 8 years in Dayton without electricity in a 1-bedroom house. Luebo Station, which was founded in 1891, our first Presbyterian station, had not ever had a water system. That meant that every drop of water used by the station had to be brought up from a spring half a mile away and up a steep hill. For 60 years, water had been hauled by Africans. A man would carry the water on the end of 2 buckets on the end of a pole that rested on his shoulder. 25 Africans worked full-time to keep the station supplied with water during dry season. My father had said that that was a job which no human being should ever have had to do. The men had developed calluses on their shoulders the size of balls. That was the picture of Luebo Station for the first 9 months that we were there. It was literally much brighter by November 1950. I was told that the day Luebo Station went from darkness to light was memorable. All the wards and rooms in the hospital were suddenly lit up. The library had lights and was attended to capacity. Each night that it was open, the church services were brightened up, and this kept the children quiet and in a worshipful mood. Last but not least, Luebo had power for the new water system. The 25 Africans who had worked tirelessly as watermen for many years were given other jobs. Daddy's hard work and effort on behalf of the station had certainly paid off in literally turning darkness to light. As the missionaries, Congolese Christian pastors, and lay people went to evangelize the villages, Congolese began to see the light of Jesus Christ as well. Many went from darkness to light spiritually. What a blessing that was. Now, this is a picture of the church that we as a family attended out in the village from Luebo. It looks like a small place. We would have Chiluba service in the Chiluba language in the morning, and my mother would meet with the women in the afternoon and teach them the Bible, new Bible lessons. Most of the women couldn't read. The missionaries began to work on educating girls. That was kind of not acceptable at first, but they worked on that. So the women couldn't read, and so my mother would teach them the Bible lesson. And then the women would go out during the week on Tuesdays and teach the Bible lesson to the women in the villages. So this church was used on Sunday morning and afternoon, but it was a school for first and second grade Congolese students during the week. The pastor generally became the teacher for the elementary students. Take your shoes from off your feet, for the ground where you are standing truly is holy ground. Before I pray, I want to thank everybody. Leah for helping with recording and the pictures. Callie for singing and Hannah for playing. Rachel for all her work in the kitchen and with her crew, Lori and I think Hannah again, and Anna and Lily. And I don't know if I left anybody out, but... Oh, okay. Jane Bailey. Great. All right, let's pray. Lord, we know from your word that many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purposes that prevail. We are so thankful for your loving providence in our own lives as Christians. We need you and we need your will for our lives. In Jesus' precious name, amen.